The hardest section that we have taught this entire year that I have taught has been Chapter 8, Section 5. It's hard. It is nasty. It is ugly. It is confusing. And the reason why it's confusing is because it's taking two fractional expressions and adding or subtracting them and making them into one fraction. It was very difficult, and I understand that many of you struggled. However, the section I'm going to teach you today is Section 8.6. Many of you are going to get the two extremely confused. So I want to make this very clear, the difference between the two sections. Section 8.5 is simplifying an expression. An expression does not have an equal sign. You with me? It's making equivalent statements, such as the name William could be William, Will, Willie, Bill, Billy, right? That could all be the same person. Those would be simplifications of one another. Does that make sense? Simplifying means you're taking two things and putting them in the smallest, simplest package you possibly can. That was Section 8.5. 8.6, how is it different? Section 8.6 is when you are solving fractional equations, you are able to eliminate the denominator by multiplying by the LCD. In Section 8.5, we found the LCD and made each denominator have that LCD, true statement, and then we wrote it as one fraction. Make sense? In 8.6, we are going to eliminate the denominator, and then we're going to have just a regular long equation, and we're going to solve that. Does that make sense? So let's go ahead and do these. Now, in 8.5, these were the steps that we did. Without a doubt, they were long and involved. There was a lot going on. And I talked about how you had to factor each denominator completely. You had to find the LCD. Then you had to write each fraction with the LCD by multiplying the top and the bottom by what you needed to get the LCD. Then all the fractions should have the same denominator, meaning they're engaged. And then we wrote them as one fraction, meaning they're married. They had the same denominator. Then we went ahead and we FOILed and distributed. And that was when we were throwing out all the boxes, right? We talked about that. And then we went ahead and combined like terms. We factored into, got our GCF and our binomials, and we put all things that should be factored completely on the top and the bottom. And we found our restrictions, and then we canceled out last. That was Section 8.5. We had a nice little neat package. Okay? Well, we're going to do similar steps, except for the steps are going to basically stop right here. And then we're going to pick up right here to get our restrictions, because we need our restrictions. And we're going to go straight to what we have to do. Okay, so let's go ahead. Again, when you are solving a fractional equation, you must find the LCD and multiply the entire equation by both sides of that. You wrote that down. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this problem right here. Everyone write this example down. First thing I want you to do is ask yourself, what is my LCD? Well, before I can do that, I have to make sure that each denominator is factored completely. So my first denominator is w minus 3. Is that factored completely? Yes, it is. Is the next denominator of w minus 5 factored completely? Yes, it is. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to find my LCD. So what is my LCD? W minus 3 and w minus 5. So we can now find our restrictions, can't we? Because that comes from our least common denominator. So my restrictions are going to be w minus 3 cannot be 0, and w minus 5 cannot be 0. So if I solve each one of those, that means w cannot be 3, and w cannot be 5. If whenever I solve this problem at the very end, if I get either one of those two answers, what do I have to do with that answer that I got? I have to throw that specific answer out. If I have to throw all of them out, if I have to throw out both of these, then that means that I have no solution. But if I only have to throw out one of them, then that means I have only one answer left. So from here, this said that I need to do what to both sides of the equation? So we're going to multiply the entire thing by my least common denominator. And we actually did this at the beginning of the year whenever we were solving for fractional equations. Remember whenever we multiplied by the LCD and got rid of the fractions? Same exact thing, except for now I have fractional expressions. So if I take this LCD and distribute it in, if I take W minus 3 times W minus 5 and divide it by W minus 3, everybody see that W minus 3's cancel out? And I'm left with the junk on the top times W minus 5. Does everyone see that? Go to the next fraction. If I take my LCD and I divide it by W minus 5, this time the W minus 5's cancel out, and I'm left with the junk on top, which is a 9. And then what else? W minus 3, very good, is equal to, now go to the last one. Is there a fraction there? No. So I have to just straight up multiply. So this is going to be 2 times W minus 3 times W minus 5. Now, is that a whole lot easier to look at than the original problem? Absolutely. It's 5 times easier. So all I have to do is what now? Distribute and FOIL. So let's go ahead and do that. So I have 4W minus 20 plus 9W minus 27 is equal to, drop down the 2, but then FOIL the parentheses. W squared minus 5W minus 3W plus 15. All I did was distribute and FOIL. Now I'm going to combine like terms on each side of the parentheses, or I'm sorry, in each side of the equation and then within the parentheses. So 4W and 9W gives you 13W. Negative 20 and negative 27 gives you? And then 2 parentheses, W squared minus 8W plus 15. And all I did was combine like terms. Now what should I do? Distribute. So this gives me 13W minus 47 is equal to 2W squared minus 16W plus 30. Now, just like we did whenever we were solving for equations, we set everything equal to what? 0. So if I'm setting everything equal to 0, what that means is I'm going to subtract 13W from both sides, and I'm going to add 47 to both sides. Does everyone see that, yes or no? So these are going to cancel out on the left-hand side, and I have 0. I drop down the 2W squared. This is going to give me minus 29W plus a 77. And I'm going to go ahead and factor this into 2 binomials. I have 2W and W. Factors of 77 off the top of your head. 11 and 7. So I'm going to go ahead and put the 11 on the outside so I can multiply it by 2 and the 7 with the W, or with the 2W. I need to have a positive 77, which means my signs have to be the same. And the inside is negative, so they're both negative. Inner gives me negative 7W. Outer gives me negative 22 to give you a negative what? 29. So I set each parenthesis equal to 0. And I solve. I'm going to add the 7 over, and I'm going to divide by 2. I'm going to add the 11 over. Now my question to you is, will both of those answers work? How do I know? I come right back up here to my restrictions and I say, are either one of the values that W is, which is 7 over 2 or 11, is that inside my restrictions? No, they are not, so that means both of them are answers. So yes, both of them work. Does that make sense? Very easy if you apply what we've learned throughout the year here, correct? Let's do it again. Number 2. As you're writing this down, you should be scanning that denominator thinking, is each one of those denominators factored completely? And as you write down the first denominator, you realize that you can factor that into 2 binomials, correct? So if we do that, I drop down the 2x minus 3, and then I'm going to factor the x squared minus 5x plus 6. Now here's the kicker. I need an x and an x. My factors of 6, I need a positive 6. That means my signs must be the same. If my signs are the same, can I use 6 and 1? No, because 6 plus 1 gives me 7. It does not give me 5. So my factors that I'll be utilizing are going to be minus 2 and minus 3 to get the negative 5. Okay, I'm going to change the subtraction in the middle of the 2 fractions to addition and make that a negative 5 up top. Now how do I break down x squared minus 9? X plus 3 and x minus 3. I wrote that backwards, but it's still the same thing. Is equal to 2 over an x plus 3. So, just like the last example, every denominator is factored completely. What do I need to find? An LCD. So how do I find an LCD here? I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to look at each denominator, and I know I need to have what in my first denominator? I have to have an x minus 2. What else? And then look at the next denominator. I have to have an x plus 3 in it as well. Does everybody see that that is my LCD? Yay or nay? Well, as soon as I find my LCD, what am I able to find next? The restrictions. So if I go ahead and I find the restrictions, what can x not be here, folks? Look at the first parenthesis. What can it not be? 2. What about the next parenthesis? And the last parenthesis? Good job. So I have those 3 exceptions, meaning if I get those as my answers, I have to throw out those specific answers. Does that make sense? So now that I know my LCD, what do I do next? Is this an expression or an equation? How do I tell the difference? It has an equal sign. So since there's an equal sign, I know this is an equation, which means I can multiply the entire thing by its LCD and eliminate the denominator. Since this is an equation, I can multiply the entire equation on left and right side by my LCD, essentially eliminating the denominator. So I'm going to go ahead and start distributing. So if I distribute my LCD to my very first fraction, what am I left with after canceling? I am left with my numerator of 2x minus 3, and then what else? X plus 3. Why? Because the x minus 2 and the x minus 3 are currently in the denominator and they cancel out. I am. What I'm doing is I'm taking these 3 that are in my LCD and I'm dividing them by my denominator of x minus 2. Okay, I get what you're saying. You want this to be down here. Okay, I'm out of room, but I get what you're saying. Same thing. I get you. Does that make you feel better? Okay, so if I distribute that in, what I'm going to have left The x minus 2 and the x minus 3 cancel out. True statement? Go to the next fraction. What would I be left with now? I drop down the negative 5 and I tack on the x minus the 2. Yes? Go to the last one. This is equal to what? 2, and then the x plus 3's cancel out, so I tack on the x minus 2 and the x minus the 3. Do we see all of that, yes or no? So just like in the last example, what am I going to do next? I'm going to FOIL or distribute where necessary. So if I FOIL the very first two parentheses there, I get 2x squared plus 6x minus 3x minus 9. All I did was FOIL, first, outer, inner, last. Go to the next thing, distribute, negative 5x plus 10. And just like with the first example, I'm going to FOIL my parentheses and then distribute afterwards. So I drop down the 2, x squared minus 3x minus 2x plus 6. Now what do? I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to combine like terms inside parentheses and also on each side. So I'm going to have 2x squared, 6x and 3x, or subtracting that gives you what? 3x. Minus 5x gives you negative 2x. Negative 9 plus 10 gives you a 1. Then this is going to be 2. This turns into a negative 5x. And if I distribute that, what does that give you? Minus 10x plus 12. Do you see I went ahead and combined like terms and distributed in one step there? Now at this point, what should I do? I have to set it equal to 0 and put everything on one side of the equation. So that means I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to take everything from the left-hand side and bring it all to the right. So I'm going to subtract 2x, add 2x, and subtract 1. And what you do to one side of the equation, you must do to the other to keep the scales what? Balanced, right? So over here on the left-hand side, all of these cancel out and I'm back to 0. The 2x squareds cancel out. I'm left with negative 8x plus 11. Yes? Now what? Subtract 11 and divide by negative 8. So 11 over 8 is equal to x. Does that answer work? Why? Because if I go right back to my restrictions are right here. My restriction says it cannot be 2. Is it 2? No. It cannot be 3. Is it 3? And it cannot be negative 3. Is it negative 3? So that means this is checked out and we're okay. I do not have an extraneous solution. Does everybody understand that, yes or no? Perfect. Let's do one more. Write that down. As you're writing this down, what should you be looking at in the denominator? As you're writing this down, you want to look at each denominator and say, hey, can I factor this? So if I look at my first denominator, can I factor that denominator? No, I cannot, so I leave it alone. Change my subtraction to what? Addition, making that 1 become negative, and then I look at the next denominator, 4x squared plus 1. Yes, I can break that down, and what's that going to be broken down into? 2x plus 1, 2x minus 1 is equal to, can I break down the last one, which is 2x plus 1? No, I cannot. So with that said, what do? find the LCD. What is my LCD? 2x plus 1, 2x minus 1. So now that I know what my LCD is, what should I find next? Restrictions. So I need to find those restrictions that if they equal that value, I have to toss them out. How do I find restrictions again? Take each parenthesis inside your LCD or GCF and set it equal not equal to 0. So 2x plus 1 cannot be 0, and 2x minus 1 cannot be 0. And I'm going to solve each one of those. So 2x cannot be negative 1, so x cannot be negative 1/2. 2x cannot be 1, so x cannot be positive 1/2. Does everybody see my two restrictions? What does that mean? It can't be positive 1/2, it cannot be negative 1/2. And if it is, I have to toss out those answers and make them extraneous solutions, meaning they appear algebraically to work, but whenever you plug them back in, numerically, the left-hand side does not equal the right-hand side. Okay, so now what do? I take the entire equation, and what am I going to multiply it by? The LCD, which is going to be 2x plus 1 times 2x minus 1. And when I do that, and I distribute that in, what am I left with? What else, though? I'm left with the x times the 2x plus 1. Go to the second fraction. What am I left with now? Just the previous numeral, which is negative 1, is equal to. And then what am I left lastly with? 4 times 2x minus 1. Excellent job. That is absolutely correct. And now what is your instinct telling you to do? To distribute. So if I do that, I get 2x squared plus x minus 1 is equal to 8x minus 4. Now what's your gut telling you to do? Bring everything over. Now my gut's telling me to bring everything over to the left-hand side because the right-hand side, the left-hand side has the 2x squared. So I like to keep my x squared term positive. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 8x and add 4 to both sides. So this gives me 2x squared minus 7x plus 3 is equal to 0. Now what should you do? Put it into two binomials. Absolutely. Factors of 2x squared is going to be 2x and x. I need to have a positive 3, which means my signs must be the what? The both of them have to be negative. And I have a 3 here and a 1 here because I need to get a bigger number, so I'm going to take the 3 and multiply it by 2. 2x times negative 3x gives me negative 6x, and negative 1 times x gives me a negative 1. If you add those together, they give you a negative 7. So now what do? Very good. So I'm going to have 2x minus 1 is equal to 0, and x minus 3 is equal to 0. If I solve these, I'm going to have 2x is equal to 1, so x is equal to 1/2. I have x is equal to 3. Good job. Now, I just heard something. What did I just hear? Why can it not be 1/2? Because based upon my restrictions right here, we said it could not be 1/2 or negative 1/2. And since I have an answer that is equal to 1/2, I have to throw that answer out, and the only one that's actually going to work is x equals 3. Does everybody understand that? The 1/2 is an extraneous solution, meaning if I plug that back in, it'll make that denominator become a 0, and I cannot divide by 0 ever. Do we all understand that? So that's all you have to do for your answer then. Every time we get an answer, we go back and we check our restrictions, and if either one of my answers are in that restrictions, I put an X through that one and a check mark beside the other one indicating it is correct. Any questions on this problem right here? Okay, I'd like to draw your attention to this one right here, and then we'll be done. What is this? What's going on? I have a fraction equaling a fraction. What is your gut telling you should do here? That's exactly what you should do. You do not have to do what we've just been doing. You can simply cross multiply. If you simply cross multiply here, you're going to get 4 times c minus 3 is equal to 3 times 4c plus 6. But what can x not, or what can c not be? You still have restrictions, right? You still have restrictions. And those restrictions come from your denominator. Can 3 ever equal 0? No. But can 5c minus 3 ever be 0? It can, so you have to find that restriction. Does that make sense? Okay. Questions, comments, or concerns so far about this section? Okay.